so I have a lot of desire, and I've got a lot of reading of books, but I haven't, and I made one cob thing once as part of a community up in the Seattle area. But I have this very strong desire to manifest this structure and put together a lot of things I've read about, and also, make a place on my land for more abundance and people to come. But I don't really know what I'm doing.
Right. Any other burning desires as far as learning stuff? Yeah.
I really want to build a kiln.
A kiln?
Yeah.
For pottery?
Mm-hmm.
Are you the potter out there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's a young boy, who was trying to fire a little bit of pottery last night.
Oh.
Very stiff clay.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what happened, but his name is Sylvan.
Sylvan.
Yeah, so you might keep an eye out for a little blonde guy, find out how his pottery is.
Like the 5-year-old Sylvan?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I was thinking it would be cool to make a little mix of some of the local clay and get some of the cow manure in the field and mix it up and make a flameware that you could raku
Cool.
in one of the fireplaces.
Can I back up one moment and say that clay stress slip is going to be in pallets?
Okay. That's a lot. Clay straw slip. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, I've done some building, mostly from a project management and design point of view, and know a fair amount about natural building, but I'm particularly interested in hearing about finishes, floors, some things that you mentioned at the circle this morning were really interesting.
Okay.
For me, it's kind of more of a novice and not having property or things I can really work with. I'm more interested in like what's going on through your head when you're doing any kind of projects to make sure you're not screwing it up, and a more logistical side thought process.
Anybody else?
I know, like, I want to make a couple different little structures, so like a goat house and things like that to increase the infrastructure on our property.
Right. Okay.
So maybe a house one day.
Yeah. Yep.
I'd like to learn a little more about trying to find clay. I went to my mom's property and I was looking everywhere and trying to test the soil and looking for the plants that I had read are supposed to grow in the clay, and the only thing I could find was silt, and she has like the 10 acres, and I went everywhere and I could not find clay anywhere.
Anybody else? Hanger? Yeah.
Okay. I have a design and drafting background, and I do a lot of house designs that get permitted, and I would like to incorporate more natural building techniques while working with the code and just help meld the alternative building with the conventional building.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you. Everybody, feel free to pipe in with any other questions while I'm talking. The challenge for me, 25 plus years ago, when I'd get up to talk about mud or cob or building, nobody knew what the hell I was talking about, and there was no Pinterest and there was no Instagram, and nobody knew anything. And now you guys all know a whole lot, even if you've only encountered it on the computer screen. But that, when natural builders started getting together in gatherings like this 25, 30 years ago, this was our Instagram, right? Everybody brought their slides. A lot of people brought those little celluloid slides. You remember those?
Yeah.
Right? And access to photographs and examples was actually, it was a job, right? You had to go to the library, you had to buy a lot of books, you had to collect all this stuff. Now it's everywhere. So that makes my job a little different. So I'm going to think a little bit about the best way for me to do this. So I came to natural building as an unemployed artist looking to remake my life and get out of the rat race and stop feeding the beast, right? And I bumped into a guy, a neighbor of mine, was teaching anthropology at OSU, and one day she came over. I had quit my job, I had had a train wreck and a breakup and all kinds of disasters, right? So I'm somewhat traumatized, trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life. And this friend says, this guy's coming to my anthropology class and he's giving a slide lecture and I think you'd really enjoy it. And she told me that he lived on $3,000 a year in a house he built himself for $500. And here I was trying to go back to art, right? And I thought, this is somebody I could learn from because I'm not going to make a lot of money and that's not my purpose. So I went, and the lecturer was Yanto Evans, who some of you may know because of either direct experience or the hand-sculpted house, which is a pretty wonderful book that I recommend highly if you're interested, both in cob and also in design and natural building. And the resources are out there to answer all your technical questions, finding clay, et cetera, et cetera. The most important thing is to learn through your hands. And I just want to say about Yanto that his slideshow put me back in a world where everything that people do requires art. Art is not a thing in traditional cultures, it's an activity. And if you have no art, you have no life, right? If you don't know how to spin fiber and make clothing, you're cold and you'll die. If you don't know how to hunt, if you don't know how to nap a point and put it on a stick and shoot it from a bow and kill an animal, and if you don't know how to process the animal and cook the meat and make the fire to cook the meat, you die. And all of those are arts, right? So the root comes from the same place as harmony, order, ratio, reason. All these words come from the same root, which is ancient, and it just means to fit together, right? So art is how we fit ourselves into the world we live in. And the world I was coming out of is the world where art has been made into an object. And it's an object that has speculative value, which means that if you invest in my name, right, and buy my art cheap when I'm unknown, you hope that I will become famous and the art will become really valuable and you'll have a whole shitload of money on your walls or wherever you put the art. I was completely uninterested in that kind of activity. I was more interested in finding how I fit into the world. So there's a whole long story which I won't go into here, but Yanto introduced me to mud as a building material, and mud is the common matter, right? It's the matrix for the planet. It's where everything happens, right? It's where soil starts, it's where food begins, it feeds us, we feed it when we die, right? It's all about the dirt, you all know that. But we're out of touch, right? We don't have contact anymore. And you go to school and they stuff shit into your head, but it can't compost in there. It needs to get out, you need to work with it. And some of you have experienced this, right? You go to a cob construction project and everybody's dancing around in the mud and it's ecstatic. So that's where we begin. I'm going to wave at you when I want you to change the slide, but not yet. So what are the birds and the bees, this is their living, right? This is how they make what they need. I'm going to wave like that. Forget that, change slide.
What exactly are we looking at?
Oh, sorry. These are mud daubers, so these are wasps. Those little guys run around and you see them at the edges of ponds and pools and they're collecting dirt. And look at all the different kinds of dirt. So you want to know where to get clay, right? Where to get soil. The best thing to do is just pick it up and try making something with it. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it won't. But most subsoil, once you get below the topsoil, right, where all the organic activity and biological activity is, once you get below that level, you're going to run into something that's stickier and that is relying on molecular bonds, ionic bonds, to join the material. So at the very simplest level, when you add water to flour, right, it makes it sticky. When you add water to sand, it makes it sticky. So at that basic molecular level, you can make stuff with any soil you find underfoot, but the soil is going to vary, and so what you can build varies, and you see this around the world. We'll see some more examples of different building. All right, so
Oh.
the birds do the same thing, and they collect the mud from wherever they find it, carry it in their bills, build nests. And what's the other material that's out there? Is fiber. So the beautiful thing about mud is that it's a mixture of sticky and either fibrous or sabbulous. Sabbulous is a lovely word, isn't it? It means sandy. So anything with a lot of surface area that you can connect with, or that you can mix with clay, is going to make building material for you. So we'll see more of that later. I have to acknowledge, so this is a permaculture event, right? It's all about seeds, and we all start as a seed, and we all come from our parent plants. So I wanted to acknowledge we all come from some indigenous place in the far past that some of us are trying to figure out, and the connection between me and the original peoples on this land is lost to me. I come from European stock, and my mom was an artist and single mom, and she's the one who she gave me my names. So I'm made of very watery stuff, and you kind of look at when the water comes out, so you'll just have to put up with that. Anyway, I want to thank my mom. I grew up making stuff with her. I republished her book. This was my homeschool education, even though I wasn't homeschooled. But she worked for the Children's Museum in Boston, and all the projects she did for the museum, she tested on me. And then because she couldn't spell and didn't know the alphabet very well, I did index it when I was 12. So, next. Yanto Evans is a pyromaniac, and you already heard the story about Yanto. He is the man behind rocket stoves, along with Larry Winiarski and a whole bunch of other folks. If you're interested in rocket stoves and need the manual, this is it. He also founded the Cottage company, where a lot of people learned about urban building. Would you like somebody else to do the slides because you're taking notes, like a good student?
I'm moving you back up.
No, I don't want to.
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Alan Scott, another master builder, gardener, amazing guy from Australia who was building clay ovens and then switched to brick, but he built, if any of you know Laurel's Kitchen, she wanted to bake bread, she needed an oven. Alan Scott built her oven, so there's a whole food connection and plant and garden connection there. Alan was a very generous soul, and he provided the, he welcomed me and my wife on our first date, which was a trip to California. It happened. We're going to go just back here.
And if you ignore that,
Yeah.
more reopen, or reopen, yeah.
Reopen?
If you were in preview, yeah.
How do I
Maybe
read?
put the key over yourself.
Okay.
Minimize those windows.
This might be the circumstance where you just literally throw mud on the wall and see what sticks.
Anybody here good at this stuff?
Minimize everything, right?
Were you in Chrome?
No,
Yeah, you don't need that.
no.
Your presentation's improving, right?
But there's that thing with the screen sharing.
When you're back up.
Oh, there we are, all right,
And then
good.
maybe if it-
The arrow.
Oh, freezing quick.
Need to get some orange shoes.
You know, it's like auto spell, right? I know what I want to write, I know what I want to say, I know how to spell it, but it doesn't want me to spell what I want to spell. It spells something else.
Yeah, because that's not even my
Oh
color
my
screen.
God, it's so good.
Can you ignore that and just,
I can select it. It's not even like, it's not even on
You're
here.
not really happy.
So I don't even know, like, is this your flash drive?
Yep.
So it just stopped reading your flash drive. That's part of our problem. So let's just like plug it in. There you are. No, is it this one that says last battery?
just open them, and they should open in order.
Oh, it's like all of it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not very nice.
Oh, so you just did pictures made as a presentation.
We're not screen sharing, right?
Well,
Well, let's,
So hit the read, oh, okay.
you should keep it on that screen.
I don't
I
know.
think it's up in the Apple menu if you look at
Oh, let's see.
preferences.
There we go.
oh, we've got progress.
Something's happening.
Will the arrow work?
The arrow's not working now. So anyway, so right now you have it on dual screen.
Right.
So just think of this as like a really big screen right next to it. So you just bring the arrow that goes off screen here. So now you can play around with this stuff. There you go.
There, all right.
Thanks.
Let's go the other way, thank you. Which, left or right here?
Go right.
Right. Should be good.
To go back?
Well, that's my wife and my youngest, he's now 13, taller than I am, but I have to say thank you to them, because Hannah showed up, she was a baker, she was interested in ovens, that's the story. Playing at the beach. So, you know, all of this for me is in the context of larger life and friends. Bernhard there in back showed up because he wanted to learn about mud. We've been friends for 10 or 15 years now. He's Uncle B, the boys. You know, and this is really what we're building, right? We're not building buildings, we're building relationships. You can't do that on a building site where you're working for contractors and you're on a budget and a bottom line. But you can do it when you're working with friends, providing material. My mother-in-law in Linda's house at Cobbville in Coquille, which is being reorganized as sort of a bed and breakfast Airbnb thing. So you can get in touch with them and go and visit. It's a beautiful village full of mud. And my stepmom, who's a potter, also helping us with the boys. And Bill Copperthwaite, who's a wonderful person, also has a wonderful book called A Handmade Life, which I would recommend to any and all of you. Bill spent his entire life traveling around collecting handcraft and traditional techniques and skills and sharing them with people, all in search of simpler and more connected ways of doing things. But he wasn't opposed to blending, right, the modern with the traditional, because that's where we are and that's what we have to do. We built a yurt with Bill down in Lobster Valley at the home of Margaret Mathewson, who's a phenomenal primitive skills person and a willow farmer. And we spent 10 days with Bill building this beautiful structure, which was for me an opportunity to combine Bill's approach to natural building, which was from Maine, and he had a lot of timber and local sawyers, so he could get milled lumber fairly easily, but I wanted to combine the milled lumber with mud. So I think some of what we ended up doing after the inspiration with Bill might be applicable, because Margaret is a basket weaver, right, with all that willow. You take a basket, traditionally baskets were sometimes lined with pitch or to make them waterproof, or they were lined with mud. Maybe that was the beginning of ceramics, right? Is taking a woven basket, lining it with mud, putting it in the fire, boom, all of a sudden you have a fireproof, waterproof container. So again, being able to combine fiber with earth gives you a composite material that shares properties of both, but that will do things that neither of the original materials can do, right? So you get tensile strength in a material that doesn't typically have tensile strength, and you get compressive strength in a material that doesn't typically have compressive strength, right? You take straw and you squish it, right? It's nothing, but you take straw and you mix it with mud, you have a brick. So all these things are good. And I have to thank my friend Tim, who invited me out to his place where they had a hunting cabin. I didn't have a place to live, I didn't have a place to build, and I'd worked in this community, and Tim said, we have an old hunting cabin that's falling to the ground, you fix it up, you can live in it. So that was the basis for my graduate education in natural building, which requires a place. And I know this is happening elsewhere, because I keep hearing stories of people who need a place to live. So the whole tiny house thing, right? I can make a little dwelling, I need a piece of land to put it on. And this is, I hope, partly about reestablishing the commons, right? Just because you have title to land doesn't mean that you have the right to occupy it solely by yourself. And God forbid, if you have 600 acres, you know you can't do it by yourself. So sharing the land is essential to any of these activities, because we can't do it by ourselves, and we can't afford the machinery, right? It makes it possible for one person to do stuff. So Tim's family homesteaded in this valley in the 1860s, and now they're struggling partly because of land use laws. They're not allowed to have more buildings on the place. So this was a total guerrilla setup, and this was the cabin that I moved into, which was dark and dingy and horrible, and I was a city kid, so I couldn't conceive of living in a valley. I thought you lived in a house, right? Because you grow up in the city, that's where you live in a house, right? But this was actually where I learned to live in a place, because you don't want to spend all your time in that little hovel when you're living in this beautiful valley. So it ended up looking like this, because we had to expand a little bit, and then Hannah showed up, and then Fitz showed up, and so the former woodshed became the main house. That was about a 300 square foot cottage, and this was the new woodshed, and this was the hunting cabin that became office and guest space, essentially. And that little kid's now 16 and 6'1".
Hey, could you guys move to the right one? See, that would be really, yeah.
One seat over?
Well, they can't,
Oh.
because,
See, okay.
yeah.
There are some more here on the floor.
And there's some over here
It's all
too.
right, just go ahead.
So the woodshed's really important, and I was talking to the biochar guy about this, because how you stage your wood is super critical for doing anything with fire, because you don't want to burn wet wood. So you have to be able to cut it, dry it, store it, and have easy access to it. And also, depending on what you're doing, what kind of appliances you're using, you have to have it sort of graded and ordered in different sizes. So the woodshed's a super important part of the setup. We eat a lot of bread in my family. We are very highly intolerant of gluten intolerance. And, so far, so good. Naturally leavened whole grain sourdough is a different animal than most of the bread you buy with commercial yeasts, so that's a whole other topic. But working with, all of you have cooked, right? Made pie. If you can make pie, you can make a mud house. Because it's the same thing you learn through your fingers and your hands, and it's that tactile experience that teaches you what you need to know, and you will gain a feel for the material. my building permit, this is an essential question, right? Because you want to know what's legal.
You don't want to get in trouble.
We don't want to get in trouble, right? And there are so many authorities out there telling us what we can and can't do. So Harlan, the code is complaint driven. There's generally not enough money in a city or county budget to send out an enforcement officer to go and look at everybody's property and tell you if what you're doing is right or wrong. If your neighbors complain, that's when you get into trouble. So living in a rural area is nice because mostly people in rural areas, they don't want to mess with you. So I went over to visit a neighbor of mine, an older guy, who had this incredible, beautiful big shop, and he flew an airplane, so he had the airplane signs in there, and he had this little building permit on the wall. And I looked at it, and it said, issued to Winston Grant for one shop building must be well constructed, no other restrictions. And I said, Winston, where did you get that permit? I need one. And he said, well, somebody came by and told me I needed a permit, so I wrote one. So he came by my house later because I was rebuilding the cabin at that point, and he wrote me a permit. It says, building permit. You can see it's been completely bug-eaten. Issued to Kiko Denzer for a small cabin near Grant Creek, approximately a quarter mile above confluence of Big Elk Creek and Grant Creek. Must be well constructed, no other restrictions. Signed, Judge Buckshot Bullroar, alias BS. Right? So that's the kind of permit you need. I don't know if you know Utah Phillips. He's an old anarchist and singer, and he kept on getting in trouble with the judge, and the judge finally called him in and said, Utah, you keep on breaking the rules. How come you keep on breaking the rules? And he said, well, they're for the bad people. I can't. You keep telling me to do things or telling me not to do things that I need to do. I gotta live. So we have to do what we have to do, but we also don't necessarily always have to comply with the letter. And so we ended up having to move from that little piece of paradise out in Harlan and ended up on a piece of property in Philomath in town. And I wasn't really planning on building another house. I had other things I wanted to do, but for a whole host of reasons I ended up having to build a house. And the building department, life is a little different when you're an owner builder, so you tend to get a little more slack. And B, they don't tell you how to do absolutely everything. So my experience, I was scared shitless of the building department because I'd never dealt with them before. I'd always been a guerrilla builder. But it turned out that in areas where they didn't have very much knowledge or experience, they were willing to let me lead and follow. So if I could present them with information, they would sign off. But then I also had the experience,
Is it fun?
come on in. Hey!
May we
Yeah.
join?
Sorry.
Hey.
Yeah, what's the time? How am I doing on time?
I need to keep this area clear for filming. You are at 10:23 and the session ends at 11.
Sorry I'm late.
These are all the hecklers. Good thing they show up. So, can you go back one slide? So this is the house I built. It ended up
You're
being
sitting here?
way bigger than
Oh, you.
I think I need. But what I wanted to say here is that I want to tell you a story. So I get to about this point in the house, and because we have a composting toilet and we're putting mud on the walls, we're weird in town and in the country. So friends keep on sending friends over to look at what we're doing, and one day this guy shows up who's a nurse who spends his free time doing community projects in third world countries, right, as sort of help and mission projects. But he's a very sort of meticulous and careful builder, and also is concerned about efficiency because he's trying to build stuff for poor people in poor countries, and he's concerned about getting the job done. So he comes by and he says, how come you're spending all this time cutting curves when you have a house to build? right? And defensive artist to me hears, what's the point of all this art stuff, right? It's superfluous, it's unimportant, it's unessential, and it's wasting your time and it's wasting the budget. And, you know, for 50 plus years, I've been hearing this shit and taking it personally and been pained at what I felt was a frustration because I'm interested in art and beauty. But I figured a few things out. And so I said to him, look, when you build a building, you're telling a story. And if you want to tell the story of industrial production and extraction and maximization of profit and destruction of the environment, then you build straight and square and fast. But if you want to tell a story of beauty and where we come from, and if you want to say thank you for all of these gifts, you build something beautiful.
I'm having a problem with connection.
And it was the first time that I've been able to respond to that question without anger, but with some clarity about what is really important. And what's really important is the story that we tell in the community that we build, right? Because it's not just about building houses, it's about building the culture, and that's why we're all here.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
The house is stick frame, 2x6. My friend Nathan, who is a contractor and knows the code and knows the process, agreed. I had to twist his arm, but he finally agreed to take a contract with me and do the foundation and the framing so I could get dried in and get on with the rest of it. So the quickest, easiest, cheapest thing was 2x6 frame. And since he's a timber framer, he added some beautiful timber frame details that turned out to be not only beautiful but also economical and very good use of materials. And then I finished it up with earthen plasters and lime plaster on the inside and an earthen floor, and on the exterior, on the gable ends, I did mud plaster, which I didn't even tell the building department about, and they didn't say boo. And then I'm still working on, Joseph at some point might help me put up a workshop and finish the lime plaster on the exterior of the house.
All right.
And I pretty much rebuilt the little house we had in Harlan, just at a much larger scale. You know, south windows, open plan, loft sleeping. There's a masonry heater, sorry, go back one, masonry heater here, which is actually, I don't know if some of you are rocket stove enthusiasts, you might have heard of Lasse Holmes. So he came down from Alaska and helped me build this Sidewinder rocket with a big bench, and I think my wife might have started the first fire in that because it's been getting freaking cold.
Is that heat, does that have any cooking surfaces too?
Yes,
For warming
there's
stuff?
a cooktop here. We even sprung for one of those fancy
Kind of where the
Norwegian.
rock
Sorry?
looking is it like where the rock looking is?
It's hard to see.
Right next to
Can
the
you just-
stovepipe.
Right here.
You're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the slides don't come out very well on the surface.
It's just
Um,
too bright.
Yeah, it'd be
Yeah.
nice if we could cover
I don't see
the windows
any
some way.
shade.
No.
Yeah, no, I don't think
Just
we
keep
have
going.
shades.
Yeah.
Conceptually,
The
guys.
beautiful thing
How
about
much
this
of what we're
house,
looking at is the rocket stove?
sorry?
How much of what we're looking at is the rocket stove?
Well, so the stove is right here, and then the flue goes through the bench and then back up and out. So it's all heating mass for the house. And then this is cooking surface.
Okay.
And the,
Is it rocks? Contain the bricks that you cook on?
no, the cooking surface is a cast iron top.
Okay.
It's a lid.
I think they're wondering what the elevated brick portion is in the center.
This,
Yes.
that is, it's a bell. So there's a half of a, you want to make sure no gases escape. So it's best to have 2 layers of containment for your hot gases. So I took an old filing cabinet, sliced it in half, made it thinner, and then wrapped it in brick. So in here is half a filing cabinet. It's just this big empty space. And when you pour hot air into that big empty space, it makes a pillow of heat at the top, and the air flows out the bottom, right? So the draft continues, but the heat gets stuck up here and is contained in the house. So that you get all those calories from the wood instead of sending them all up the chimney. which is the basic principle of rocket mass heaters.
Also, that like the fire and the cooking service, we kind of can't see because it's hidden by that
Correct.
brick.
Yeah,
Well,
in
the fire and the
kitchen.
cooking surface is here. Sorry, it's a little hard to,
Okay.
We're
Yeah,
levitating
I
above
can
his
see.
living room, and then
Yeah.
to the far end is his kitchen.
Yeah, I see
Underneath the
where it is
loft.
now. It's dark.
And he feeds it from the kitchen.
Okay.
so basically this is where the fire is.
Yeah, and it wraps through all that and then out.
And then it comes down in the bench, it pops up into the bell here, it drops back down, it comes through
Mm.
and up and out. And you can do all kinds of crazy things with your venting when you build a mass heater. The important point here is actually less the heater than the fact that the entire building, despite it being a very conventional build, the entire building is connected to the ground, right? So the foundation trench goes down fairly deep and is filled with, well, there was an old garage on the site and a slab. On top of the slab, there's 6 inches of rock, and on top of the rock is the earthen floor. All of that mass being connected to the earth is connected to a constant source of 55 to 60 degree temperatures, right? Because below the frost line, the earth stays a stable temperature.
Versus having a vented crawl space, which keeps much colder air
Right.
screaming underneath
Right.
your house.
So I don't have to insulate under there. When I was building the last winter that we were doing finish work, I was in there, there was no heat in the building, and we had a couple weeks of 20-degree temperatures, and the interior temperature of that building never dropped below 50. So I could work in this outfit perfectly comfortably and not need any additional heat. And in the summer, it's always comfortable and cool in that building, even though we have 104-degree days in Kelowna. So that understanding of mass and heat retention is a big part of natural building, because what you want to do is use your materials in ways that they contribute their native properties to your comfort. And that also reduces your need for fuel and burning.
Are there any complexities with moisture in that
There,
context with this
well, there's-
climate?
yeah, there's issues with moisture, and the big one, especially with an earthen floor, is vapor barriers. And as far as I'm concerned, the jury's still out on that, and I spent a lot of time looking at that and talking to people, and there are professional floor folks who do earthen floors who say always have a vapor barrier, but I had heard enough stories and talked to enough other knowledgeable people who said you want the building to breathe. That makes sense to me, just as a natural principle, right? Everything alive needs to breathe, and if your house is alive, you want it to breathe. So this is where I had to make a case to the building department. I don't want to put a vapor barrier in, because the vapor barrier is standard in most building practices.
In the walls and the floors and the ceiling, but you're talking about the floors
I'm talking
specifically.
about floors. So the walls are another discussion. But they basically said, show me your resources, your citations, and we'll see what we think, and they approved it.
Yeah, so in here, you had the trench around the foundations that was almost like a curtain drain under the walls.
Yep.
Like deeper rock,
Yep.
and then you had the 6 inches of rock just over whatever the subsoil was.
Yep.
And then your earthen floor.
Yep.
How thick was the packed earth?
No, so the rock is important because it has to be rock that will drain.
Yeah.
So it either needs to be one size crushed rock or drain or round,
And then on that it's just like clay.
and on that is cob.
And you can use pumice or red scoria. People use various rocks and different rocks.
Well,
What's
except-
the cob floor though? How thick is the cob?
Mine is 2 inches, but you can go as thin as a half an inch.
Oh, wow, okay.
Mhm.
Since you're lower in the ground, how do you divert like heavy rain and stuff like that?
Well, we're on top of a hill, and because the existing concrete pad was there for the, basically we bought the stem wall up above grade, and that's what you want to do. You want your floor to be above grade. In the little house that I lived in Harlan, the site was such that I had to go down. So I dug a drain trench all the way around the building, and it was very silty soil, and it drained really well, and so we had a below grade earthen floor, which didn't have moisture problems. It was fairly unusual.
Wow.
Was your like foundation trench curtain drain thing just like another 6 inches deeper than your rock?
Well, so a lot of the cob builders are, thanks for doing that. Diane. A lot of cob builders are doing rubble trench foundations, which is basically an enormous curtain drain big enough to support the walls.
Yeah.
And that way the foundation itself drains. But this was concrete because that's what code requires. So it's a footer on top of packed gravel with a curtain drain on the outside of the footer. So that any water coming into the foundation.
And how deep is that?
That depends on where you are and the
Yeah.
frost line.
Yeah.
like
So
at
in
least
Washington,
even-
it's only 12 inches.
Western Washington.
Western Washington, you're right, Eastern Washington, Washington's got also.
But these are technical, this is technical stuff that you generally have to get into on your site
Yeah.
with your building department or with an engineer who knows where you live.
Okay.
Hold on, Joseph, something you back.
So, I know it's kind of fancy, but I've become really attached to my hydronically heated floors. I wonder if you can do that in an earthen floor.
Oh, yes, you definitely can. But I haven't had anybody who's been able to answer this question for me, but in Europe, they're putting hydronic systems in the walls, apparently because they've had reported health issues from having too much heat underfoot.
Your circulation likes to keep your feet and hands cooler
Yeah,
than the core.
yeah.
And so if your feet are heated, and this is what I've heard from multiple sources as well. And they also have a lot of old buildings and radiators and walls, and
Yeah.
we had some people doing in our houses, radiant heat in the walls and radiators. Yeah.
The lower part of the walls, presumably?
Yeah, I would imagine.
They have all kinds of technology in Europe with plug and play like things. But one thing I wanted to just say about your design or ask is, do you feel like the house was designed around the stove, like as far as a little bit?
The house, I mean, the open plan for mass heat, an open plan means you get better distribution of heat. The interesting thing about masonry heat is that it's radiant. You're not heating the air. You're heating mass. And when you heat mass, you don't get the big temperature differentials in the space. So, you don't get these pillows of hot air sitting on your head. The difference between the ceiling and the floor is a matter of a few degrees. So the other thing that's worth noting here is that loft space is officially illegal to live in, right? If you don't have legal stairs, you're not allowed to sleep or, use that space. So of course, this is one of the areas where you can wiggle, and we just store boys in beds in our lofts, right? Occasionally when we need to. The extra square footage in the loft space is not taxable. So we're only taxed on 890 square feet of house, even though it's 1,400 square feet of space, which is something worth considering. And the other thing that's really important is, if you can make friends with your contractor, it makes the process so much more enjoyable, because Nathan here is my building buddy and a great guy, and our kids got along, and my wife cooked lunch for everybody every day, which meant that he actually ate lunch. Normally his building practice is to eat breakfast, work all day, and then come home really hungry and grumpy. And working on our house, he said, was like the best job ever. Couldn't get any better than that. So,
Yay.
natural building. Well, how the heck did we get back there? Just a little word about families and the culture we're building. This goes way back, and this pattern is part of an anthropologist's life work looking at the graphic language of human culture and talking about patterns in permaculture. You find this graphic symbolism in tribal art everywhere around the world, irrespective of historical period or language grouping or genetic similarities. And the idea or the question is, what's the story that we all tell in every culture? The story that we all tell is where I started, right? We're all seeds. We come from parent plants. We spread new seed and they bear new fruit, and it's a continuity. And so it shows up in this imagery of these figures, right, who are all connected. And there's fascinating work that you can delve into, and it's another wormhole, rabbit hole that you can go down. But the reason that I wanted to bring it up is because it's built into all of the physical culture of all of these different cultures. So you see it in the shields and in the clothing and in the buildings. All of the work is decorated with the story of the culture. And I feel like this is an important part of what we're doing and what I'm seeing here is because, you know, a generation later, there's now this permaculture story that's being told and being spread in all kinds of different, wonderful, amazing ways. And I think here are some of the patterns showing up in, I have a 12-volume set of books that covers this single topic. And if you want to talk to me about it later, I'm happy to fill your ears. I didn't bring them with me. Some ovens. So I like building ovens. I'm not really interested in building houses. They're too fucking big projects. They take up all your brain space. I was miserable for 3 years while I was building my house. And I couldn't think about anything else. An oven is a great project because you can get it done and it's over. And their code restrictions are much less. So I recommend ovens for starter projects. Once you build an oven, you can build a house, and I can tell you stories of people who've done that and also built businesses and completely changed their lives just because of a little oven. This is a restaurant oven. This is at GTS, which is a farm-to-table restaurant in Philomath, where you can go and have lunch on your way home if you drive north. And
What was the restaurant called?
Gathering Together Farm, GTS. So 8 years ago at Approvecho, not far from here, I taught a little course where in the midst of a natural building class where people were basically training to go into the trades with natural materials, I had a week-long session where we started out with a platform, and in the course of a week, we collected material, we assembled the frame, we put mud on the frame, we got the roof framing up, and we made a little yurt in a week with about 15 people. It was a glorious project, and basically it was a big basket, and we covered the walls with mud. And this was inspired in part by Bill Copperthwaite, who I mentioned earlier. And one of the guys in this class, I just saw in England, this, just quickly, this is a basket, this was a test model that we just made with little bamboo sticks, and then we covered it with burlap dipped in gypsum plaster, right, just for a very quick shell. This is exactly, it serves the same function as clay and fiber mixed together would serve. So think of oriented strand board. This is moldable oriented strand board. Back, sorry. Two guys were standing on this.
Wow.
This was, a little basket made of sticks, that big, that high, 300 pounds. No problem. Just wrapped in cloth and gypsum plaster. So the story about the guy in that class, he was a graphic designer working on computers, tired of his life, wanted to do something different, came to Approvecho, took a 7-week class, went to Utah, worked with an outfit, the name of which I don't remember, but their model is to offer free education to people who want to learn natural building. You commit to like 15 weeks of work that you do for free. They feed you, but the project that you're working on is a contracted project for a paying client who has to pay about 1/3 less because they're not paying labor costs. So this guy went and worked for those folks for a little while, took it back to England, started a company called Heartwind, and now they are able to offer fancy clients beautiful, naturally built projects. But the most important and beautiful thing is that 15 or 20 people live together, work together, play together, cook together for 15 to 17 weeks and build a beautiful building and have an experience of making a community. And then, friendships are made. I'm sure there are relationships that are formed. I can tell you of a lot of relationships that came out of natural building classes and events. And that's, that's the work, right? Is rebuilding the culture. But we're stuck with this situation where new building requires lots of money and permitting and all this other stuff. So I love this story because Jeffrey's managed to have a foot in both worlds and not, not end up tearing himself in two, right? He's got the village, he's got the friends, he's got the community, he's got the joy of the work, and he's also able to pay the bills.
What is his group called?
Hartwyn, Hartwyn.
And what's the city? And where's he?
He's in Bristol, UK. And the Utah connection might be somewhere on his website. I'm not sure. So that's really, I think we can stop. Oh, look, all right, a few more pictures. Anybody seen this as Yemen, which is currently subject to horrendous political and economic bullshit, but this is, I forget how old, forgetting the name of the town, but these are earthen buildings. Some of them are 13 stories tall.
15 stories.
Yes, and this is an area with very little water, and the way they've managed water is fascinating. They actually brought in piped water, and it created huge problems because the wastewater softened the ground and they had movement problems. Right when they used their traditional waste management techniques, there wasn't a problem. So, and the building is done communally, and this is an Islamic nation, so there's a lot of prayer and ceremony involved in the building process. In Mali, in Jenne, the masons are responsible not only for building the house, but they're responsible for burying the owner of the house when the owner dies. It's a very spiritual role, right? Because they're building containers for lives and people, as well as just buildings. So these photographs were some of the inspiration for me because there's no code here, and the storytelling and the sculpture and the beauty of the building is unrestrained, right? And it's developed in concert with the bodies of the people doing the work and the materials that the land gives them and the patterns of life in the community.
Where was that in Yemen also?
Sorry?
Was that last one in Yemen also?
No, the last one is in Africa, and it's from Spectacular Vernacular, which is a natural building, a book of African architecture. This is from a book called African Painted Houses, and these are just little square boxes, right? But the walls are traditionally redecorated every year by the women who live in them, and they tell the story of the land. And there's a whole relationship between the agricultural practices of the people and the patterns they put on the buildings. And often the work of plastering and finishing the building is women's work. And it's interesting now, Sakita Krimmel, who's started a floor business in Portland and actually manufactures a floor product, is retelling the story of learning how to do what she does, because it was the traditional woman's practice in the southwest of this country to lay the floors and to plaster the walls. And so the materials are coming up from underfoot, and I hope especially you'll take home the idea that really the best thing to do is to build with material, build something. Doesn't matter really what it is. Make a brick, make a little oven, try to make a pinch pot, see what happens to it, and then try that in different places with different materials. And there's tests you can do that will, that are somewhat scientific, that will tell you more about what the material is, but mostly what you'll gain knowledge in your hands.
Even if it's all like silk.
Yeah.
I found that I did the soil test and it was like everywhere.
The shake test.
Always, all of it is silt and just a little
When
bit of sand.
When it dries hard, what's it like?
Well, when it's on the ground, I thought, oh, that looks so much like clay because it's so compact and
And is it,
dense
how,
and-
if you scratch it with your fingernail, how deep does the scratch go?
I don't know.
So this is
Yeah.
what I'm saying, this is what you need to know,
Okay.
right? You need to, it's like plants, right? You need to know the seeds, you need to know the flowers, you need to know the leaves, you need to know what it looks like in the winter, you need to know what it looks like in the spring, you need to know what it looks like in the summer, you need to know the texture of the bark. All of these are experiential knowledge, and it's not hard to do with clay, right? You can pick it up. I'm gonna pass this around. These are clay balls from all kinds of different sources.
Are they fired clay balls?
No, raw. So don't spit on them, please. This is the Mosque at Jenne, which embodies a culture and a story. Every year they replaster it, and the replastering.
You have 10 minutes.
Thanks. The replastering is a communal project, and everyone comes out and everybody helps, from the littlest to the oldest. And then there's a race to see who can plaster their section of the building fastest, and the scaffolding is built in. And obviously OSHA rules don't apply.
Where did you say it is?
Mali, Jenne, the mosque at Jenne. One of the largest earthen structures on the planet, except for the Great Wall of China. Yeah. Same in Japan, right? Across the world. In Japan, the basket tradition is really strong, and bamboo is one of the primary building materials. So here's your combination of materials, right? You take split bamboo and you just tie it into a very open, loose framework, and then you leave all the strings hanging. So there's lots of fiber in there, and then you pack balls of mud in between or around the net, and it dries, and you have a very solid, very thin wall. And obviously, again, something that you can do with the whole family. This is the only place on the planet that building with earth is impractical. However, it's the same principles, right? Use what you have and do what it will allow you to do. And the brilliant part of the engineering of igloos is fascinating, because there's heat management, right? Because the snow is insulative. But then once you're in there, you also have raised platforms where you sleep and eat and sit that get you up off the cold ground, because cold air sinks, right? And it will flow down low. But even the heat from a little fat lamp will change the interior environment in that igloo. So again, it's managing mass and temperature and heat and airflow and ventilation and all of those things. And even though this seems very simple and primitive, right, it's actually very complex and sophisticated and effective.
Okay, about this box, how, this is like probably from all over
Yep.
everywhere you go. Is this like the world
Yeah,
of
some of them
box?
are from friends, mostly from the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Well, and
Yep.
the shiny is just from it, like hands from oil.
It's
just
burnishing.
A little bit polished.
Just burnishing, no oil, just pressure, which is one of the properties of clay. If you've seen the black Oaxacan pottery or other burnished pottery, it shines like glass.
Are you doing that with your hands or with a cloth or what?
Usually with a polished stone or glass, something hard and smooth. And if you look up Doro Dango or Japanese mud dumplings on the internet, you'll find all kinds of instructional videos and lovely photographs and very obsessive, compulsive people.
Bring your collection next year.
Yeah, right. Right.
But
Or
let's
maybe
compare our Doro
maybe we'll
Dingos.
make mud balls next year, because it's something I do it when I go on a walk. I pick up dirt. This is what I do. I pick up dirt, I spit on it, and I walk around with it on it and see if it'll make a mud ball. If it'll make a mud ball, it'll make a building.
Get it there.
There's an old guy in England who sort of was involved in the Cobb revival there, and he said, I haven't met a subsoil I didn't like. What happens is that it's very silty, the compressive strength is less, and you have to increase the width of your wall, right? But the old Saudis were built from topsoil,
Wow.
right?
It has a lot of organic matter from that.
And all the roots, so again, it's a combination of fiber and sticky, right? Because the roots are holding all the soil together.
So clay is typically a subsoil?
Yes,
Topsoil?
yeah,
Okay.
it depends on the soil.
What's the technique, the Japanese technique?
Dorodango,
Dorodango.
Dorodango.
Have you seen any where people are essentially, not just like using topsoil, but like are actually planting on top of the mud buildings? And then the roots are, you kind of get some more insulation, the roots are holding everything together.
No,
That's fascinating.
no. I mean, if you have an exposed horizontal surface, it's going to be subject to saturation and wear.
It's nice to keep your walls dryish.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
They,
Yeah,
they
especially
insulate
for the
better.
So I spent a fair number of years working as a teaching artist in the schools with Mary.
I never said.
Which is a great thing to do with kids because you can take the school environment, which is dull and dead and ugly, and you can make it beautiful, and the kids can put mud on the wall and they do their designs. So what I haven't found is a school that's willing to institute this as an annual event where the 4th grade does it one year and then teaches the new 4th grade the next year how to do it, which would build culture in the schools. You know, they do that with the outdoor school, right, and some other things. But we haven't got it with the murals
Are you
yet.
saying having the students make the cob and put it on the wall or just paint with glass? With the...
You can wash the mural off, put a whole new mural up the next year. So every year, my vision was every year, a new class would tell the story on the wall of the school. You know, and that way you get to develop a theme, you develop images, you develop graphic design, all kinds of.
There would have to be a texture involved, right?
You can put mud on anything. You can put mud on glass. It's crazy, but it's you know, it depends on the mud. It depends on the surface. Texture does help with bond, and there's all kinds of different things you can do. But if you try it, you
Would it
can.
have to be protected from the elements, from rain?
Well, it's always better to have a protected area, but the little cob building I built out in Harlan was exposed on the south side. It had a 6-inch overhang. It was unplastered for years. And you know, you think about paint, you repaint a house every 5 years. Cob is 2-foot thick paint. It will take a lot of years to wear away enough to make a difference. The bigger risk is that it gets invaded by digger bees, which really love hot cob walls, and they like to burrow in there and make their homes and lay their eggs. And it's great for the garden because they're really good pollinators, but it does start to degrade the building. So pizza ovens, I started out in community development back in Boston in the 80s, and 20 years later, the community developers on the East Coast are pushing mud ovens as a way to build community.
At least you didn't have to die
Everywhere.
to be appreciated.
What?
At least you didn't have to die to be appreciated. That's within your lifetime.
So this is one of the yurts we built at Aprovecho. The terrible photograph doesn't show up well on this wall. That might be it. That's as far as we get. Anyway, I'm about and done with time, so I'm happy to answer more questions. I hope I addressed at least peripherally concerns people have, but if you want to talk, I'm happy to. Yeah.
You probably, I'm sure, familiar with the book Shelter.
Yep.
In there was a couple pages on a thing they call a Simba ram.
Yep.
Which is, okay, you familiar with?
Yep. A lot of work, industrial machinery trying to increase compressive strength where I don't think it's really necessary. Plus, every time you make a brick, you make 4 to 6 joints that are then subject to movement or weak mortar. And the beauty of cob is that it's monolithic and it's all stitched together by the fiber which crosses the joints.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a more of a random sort of fractalized structure.
Okay.
Bricks tend to crack on joints. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work making bricks.
Mm.
It's handy if you have to transport material.
Uh-huh.
And it is useful for some kinds of structures, but you know, there's always a little bit of give and take on every.
I mean, in the Southwest, there's certainly a, adobe brick tradition.
Yeah, those aren't compressed.
Uh-huh. So that makes a difference in your mind.
And your
Well-
seismic code, your seismic concerns might be different in different places too.
Yeah, but the Simba Ram, they developed it to send to freaking Africa. I mean, people have been building with mud over there for millennia. Crying out loud, they don't need fancy frickin' machines to make it more expensive and difficult.
Okay.
So if I'm trying to build this clay straw slip in pallets, and I'm using the idea of the pallets instead of dimensional lumber
Yeah.
as a way to hold the infill,
Yeah.
and to allow the infill to build the strength of the walls, but to create some insulative properties.
Yeah.
Am I on the right track?
Yeah. I would, straw clay is a little hard to manage depending on the length of the fibers. I really like sawdust and clay.
Ah.
If you combine a lot of sawdust and clay with a little bit of fiber, you get a combination of the two, because the sawdust and clay will pour and pack more easily
Okay.
than the straw clay. Typically, straw clay is made in a form that's open from the top, so you can compact it easily from the top,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. It's probably a little bit better insulation than sawdust. It depends on the size of the sawdust, right? But either way, yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Because I can't find much online about it, and so I'd kind of like to build this as a proof of concept,
Right.
but I want to use the best technology I can come up
Take a
with.
pallet
Yeah.
and fill, you know how they're usually split in two?
Uh-huh.
Fill one side with straw and clay
Uh-huh.
mix, fill the other side with sawdust mix, let it dry, see how it performs, see how it feels to build with it, which one takes longer, which one's easier, what materials are most easily available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some pallet cabin builders that I can connect with that build stuff.
I was just curious, with your house project, what monetary cost, what do you think your budget and
Which house?
the bigger one?
The conventional one, $125,000, no labor. That included, their contract with me for the framing and foundation. But, you know, when you work that out by square foot, I forget what it is, it's like, 1,400, at least somebody good at math, 1,400 square feet.
Call it $90 a square foot for materials and some contracting. You said 100 and, you said 1,400 square feet before.
Yeah.
That doesn't include all for you.
Sorry?
That doesn't include all of your.
No, but I was happy. You know, I mean, relatively.
He had the freedom to do that, but just FYI, right now, the cost of everything, like, and I track it a lot, is almost 50% rise in the past
Yeah.
6 to 10 years. Like if you compare anything to 5-6 years ago, it's not the right comparison.
But, you know, if you're building a tiny house or you're doing guerrilla building and you don't have to get certified lumber and you don't have to get brand new, you know, top of the line windows, everything gets much cheaper.
Yeah. Non-permitted stuff.
Yeah, I have just a question about, like, Laura with the pallets and the ways, how important is it to really compress the clay in your cob mix versus just like kind of getting it on there to like get out
It
air
depends,
to
yeah,
ram it? Like,
it depends on what you want. The more trapped air, the higher the insulation value, but the weaker the material. So, you know, if you're filling pallets and the pallets are taking all the structure, I don't know, Joseph's had more experience with this, he might be a better person to talk to about it.
Yeah, we can talk. I at the Skillshare we could talk about some specific things like that. I was going to do a presentation, but in general, the pallets seem like a great way to hold a loft.
Yeah.
You know, even when you do straw clay houses, you penetrate every 2 feet with some bamboo spears to kind of hang up the straw clay, because it will shrink and it will settle, and gravity's pulling on it forever, and so you want to keep that loft if you're doing straw clay, but you also have to have good structure. The pallet by themselves is not really necessarily a good structural design. So
You get the strength in the clay.
Well, and the fill will also change the strength of the pallet.
Yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
if you fill it up, it gets much stronger.
Mhm.
But, you know, the other thing to consider is airflow. So you want to block airflow.
Mhm.
So you don't want it so loose and open that air can move through it easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most heat loss is not insulation related; it's air leakage related.
Yeah.
yeah, does the gypsum burlap, if that were, if like something like
Yeah.
that were to go to the exterior, would that like trap air too?
That would slow the passage of air. The problem with gypsum as a building material is that it holds on to water. It's hydrophilic.
Yeah.
And you really want things that don't hold on to water.
Especially on exterior.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is one person up near where I live mixed a little bit of like mason, like was either grout or Portland cement or something like that in with lime and put like VSATs or landscape fabric in that mixture. What do you think about mixing a more conventional binder like mortar?
Well,
or
clay is the most conventional binder, right?
yeah,
It's the most common building material on the planet,
yeah.
and it's usually free. Cement is an industrial modern product. The problem with cement is very strong, but it's hydrophilic, so it's a big, heavy sponge. If you add cement to earthen material, you don't get an earthen material and you don't get cement. It's weak and it's wet and it's cold. So I really would not recommend it. Are we done?
Yes.
It was over about 15 minutes ago.